Greetings, citizens of the world. An interesting new Ministry of Foreign Affairs, MOFA, report circulating the Kremlin today detailing the just completed telephonic conference between Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov and U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo notes that at the same time the Americans are expressing their desire for better relations with Russia, President Trump is moving in for the kill against the European Union by slamming them with punishing tariffs. While at the same time, Trump is driving a stake into the very heart of America's leftists with his remaking of the entire judicial branch of the tripartite structure that comprises the constitutional United States Republic, and that will, undoubtedly, stamp his mark on his nation for, at least, the next 50 years. According to this report, while having to deal with the illicit scheme that cleared Hillary Clinton of her crimes, while at the same framing President Trump in what is known now as the Russia hoax, that shockingly included the Obama regime illegally spying on the Trump campaign in what is now being called Spygate. Foreign Minister Lavrov relates how he was told by Secretary Pompeo that Trump is not only unfazed by these events, he is, actually, beginning to retaliate against everyone who has sought to destroy him, most particularly the European Union. In point of fact, this report continues. Secretary Pompeo stated that President Trump went through the roof this past weekend when the European Union masterminded the overthrow of the democratically elected new populist Italian government, which EU Commissioner Gunther Oettinger outrageously said was deserved, and that the whip of the financial markets should dissuade Italians from voting for populist Severo again, but that former Greek finance minister Yanis Varoufakis, in hitting out against this colossal election blunder, warned will now allow the next Italian general election to be a referendum on nothing less than the future of the Eurozone itself. Equally enraging President Trump about the European Union this past weekend, this report details, was the British government's Orwellian arrest, secret trial, and secret imprisonment of a populist anti-immigrant activist named Tommy Robinson, and whom, for the crime of posting to his live Facebook video feed of satanic Islamic child rapists being brought into trial, has now been thrown into a prison where a price on his head has been placed, with inmates being offered drugs and mobile phones to kill him. Acting with the same mode of spirit and fearlessness that President Ronald Reagan once did when confronting the evilness of Soviet communists, this report says, President Trump has, likewise, moved swiftly against the now equally vile European Union, with his first meeting yesterday in his White House Oval Office with the global fashion icon Kim Kardashian West, and her 60 million Twitter followers, along with her husband Kanye West's 28 million Twitter followers, where they discussed reforming the U.S. legal and prison system, so that no American could ever fear their becoming their nation's Tommy Robinson. While showing to the peoples of Europe that America will never become a secret arrest, trial and imprisonment nation like Britain, this report notes, Secretary Pompeo further related to Foreign Minister Lavrov that President Trump will be slamming the European Union with over $7 billion in tariffs today, with Trump, also, having just launched another national security investigation into European Union car and truck imports that could lead to even more new U.S. tariffs. With the American leftist mainstream media blasting the Kim-Trump summit on prison and legal reform, with CNN even shockingly saying Kim Kardashian didn't even have a right to visit with her own nation's leader, this report continues, President Trump, nevertheless, moved too quickly to rectify the legal and prison abuses heaped upon the citizens of the U.S. by the Obama-Clinton regime, and as exampled by his pardoning today of the conservative author and filmmaker Dinesh D'Souza, whom Trump stated about by writing on his Twitter page, he was treated very unfairly by our government. Equally stunning about the American leftist mainstream media, this report details, was this past week dramatically celebrating the demise of pro-Trump conservative comedian Roseanne Barr, who starred in the nation's most watched television comedy program, but who, after tweeting that former top Obama aide Valerie Jarrett was the offspring of Islamic terrorists and Planet of the Apes, was quickly fired, but who are all now remaining silent after the rabidly anti-Trump leftist comedian Samantha Bee went on her TBS network, owned by CNN parent company Turner Broadcasting, program just hours ago, telling President Trump's daughter Ivanka to put on something tight and low-cut and go into her father's bedroom at the White House and then, do something about your dad's immigration practices, you feckless cunt. with it being noted recently how these leftist American mainstream journalists continue to blame the public for not believing them, rather than admitting they themselves created this environment of deep distrust by acting as salespeople for the status quo, versus challenging the powerful like they're supposed to. This report continues, this fact hasn't been lost on the American people, who by the millions have been flocking to the pro-Trump television cable news giant Fox News rather than have their minds filled with leftist communist dribble, and as proved by ratings data released yesterday by Nielsen Media Research that showed Fox News extended its run of consecutive months at number 1 to a staggering 197, with their, also, hitting another impressive milestone showing that Fox News has now beaten every other network in basic cable for 23 months straight. With the fanatically anti-Trump leftist cable news network CNN having its ratings collapse by over 25% this past month alone, this report notes, the downright communist cable news network MSNBC is now resorting to outright treason against their own nation and people to damage President Trump, and whom, in just the past 24 hours, stunningly allowed their so-called reporter Kendall Anian, who was fired by the Los Angeles Times after they discovered he was working for the CIA to release some of the most closely guarded secrets about North Korea and its nuclear weapons program just prior to Trump meeting North Korean leader Kim Jong-un on 12 June in Singapore. While the American leftist mainstream media continues on their anti-Trump tirade, with nothing seemingly being able to stop them before they destroy themselves completely, being lost to them, and hence to the citizens of the U.S. they're supposed to be serving, this report warns, is the very crux of the gravest existential battle for the United States this nation has ever seen, and whose signs are best exemplified by U.S. Senator, and supposed U.S. presidential candidate in 2020, Elizabeth Warren, who wants to impose upon America a Chinese communist-type authoritarian government, but whose opposition is America's powerful billionaire oligarchs, one of whose main operators is U.S. Supreme Court Justice Neil Gorsuch, and whom, over a decade ago, gathered with these money elites fearful of the rise of communism in the U.S. and where Gorsuch proclaimed nothing is inevitable and is urging vigilance to all threats to our prosperity. In being vigilant to all threats to their prosperity, this report explains, it was no surprise at all when, in 2016, billionaire real estate developer Donald Trump stunningly captured the White House, with one of his first acts being the appointment of Neil Gorsuch to the U.S. Supreme Court, and who occupied the seat deliberately left unfilled by the Republican Party during the Obama regime. Even more important to note, this report says, is that not only did the Republican Party refuse to seat President Obama's nominee to the U.S. Supreme Court, they, also, left vacant nearly a full third of the U.S. federal judgeships, and that has allowed President Trump, with just over a year in office, to already appointed 21 of America's 167 current U.S. Federal Circuit judges, with his intending to fill an additional 20 or more vacancies by the end of this year, thus meaning that, by 2019, Trump judges will be participating in more than 15,000 decisions every year, and almost all those decisions will be the law of the land. To the full consequence of what President Trump and the Republican Party are doing to completely remake the entire judicial branch of the U.S. government in order to protect their prosperity, this report says, is nothing less than to drive a stake directly into the heart of American leftist communist forces and kill them forever. With the latest blows struck being the U.S. Supreme Court finally halting the leftists' expansion of so-called abortion rights, their ruling that workers have to use arbitration, instead of the courts, when settling disputes against companies, and their slamming down the Obama-Clinton regime's expansion of police powers to search Americans' homes and property without warrants, but whose death blow ruling against these leftists is expected in the coming few weeks when the U.S. Supreme Court will rule that leftist labor unions can no longer force their members to pay dues, with Republican Party operative Grover Norquist correctly stating what will happen next: try funding the modern Democratic Party without union dues, good luck. With Syrian President Bashar al-Assad having just vowed to retake areas of his country now held by U.S.-backed Kurds, and his saying that the United States should learn the lesson of Iraq and get out of Syria, and who frightfully revealed how close the United States and Russia are to open conflict. This report concludes, Secretary Pompeo did state to Foreign Minister Lavrov that President Trump had ordered Kurdish forces to withdraw, thus giving a small glimpse that the world can be restabilized once these American leftists are done away with, and that Trump's loving hug of a small child in the White House yesterday showed he is anticipating too, at least one would like to believe.